Good evening, students, and welcome to tonight's project management webinar on Module 1, Manage Project Scope. My name is Tracy Hickey, and I am the project management trainer, so you'll have hopefully a bit of correspondence with me throughout the course as we work together on getting you through your Diploma of Project Management. Before we get into the actual webinar tonight, and just while some other students may be still arriving, just want to go through a little bit of housekeeping. You'll see in your navigation panel there's the icon for raising your hand, and there's also a area for questions. So I just want to just make sure first that everyone can see the screen and hear me okay. So if you could either just type in yes that you can hear me, or just raise your hand to let me know that everyone can see and hear okay. If there's any issues, just let me know. So far looks like everyone can hear me okay, which is great. Okay, awesome. Throughout the webinar tonight, feel free to ask questions as we go through. Hopefully in the time that we have together, I'll answer a lot of the questions that you have, and we will have questions at the end, but I do want it to be interactive. If there's anything that you think of as we're touching on some of the topics, feel free to ask those questions. You'll also see in the handout section there is a PDF copy of the slides that I'm using tonight. So feel free to download that and keep a copy of that to refer back to. Half of the webinar I will be just flicking live between OpenSpace and the actual documents. So those slides won't obviously be on the PowerPoint, but all these early slides where we're setting everything up will be. So feel free to download that as we go through as well. So on tonight's webinar, we're going to cover a lot of things. So we will be going quite quickly through it. Hopefully it's all helpful and relevant. First, I just want to frame what project management is as a whole, just so we know how we're approaching the course as a whole. Then I want to look at managing scope and some of those key concepts that you will have studied or be studying in this first module. Looking at the project and choose whether to choose your own work-based project or use the case study, benefits of those. Then some general tips on completing assessments, which will apply right throughout the course. And then I want to break it down to the actual scope assessments and how to go about approaching those, and just point out a few of the areas of the assessments that might be a little bit more trickier than others, and just to highlight those points to you. And as I said, then we can have questions at the end for anything else that may come up. Now, one of the other things I just want to highlight before we get into the bulk of the webinar is that you do have a lot of support options. I don't know whether this is your first time studying online or whether you're used to it. For me personally, I've done a lot of my study by distance education. I love the flexibility of it, being able to work on my own time, and the fact that I've been able to work full time, raise my family, be involved with other activities around my study has been great. It's worked really well for me. But I do know that for a lot of students, it can feel like you're a little bit alone, especially if you're sitting there at night after a long day at work and you're looking at an assessment going, I don't know where to start. So just know that there are people that you can reach out to. Anything administrative that you have issues with, the student support team are available a lot, as you can see, during the week. So feel free to contact them if you have any administrative issues. Learning support team do webinars on OpenSpace and how to navigate around OpenSpace, and they also do one-on-one appointments if you want a study plan set up, or you just want to get some other general study advice before you get started. So their information is there. You can also reach out to study buddies. Under the contacts in your message center, you'll find students that are at a similar stage of the course as you are. So even just to help keep each other motivated or accountable, that kind of thing, or discuss ideas with. Some people love working with others prefer to work alone. So you'll soon find out what your learning and study style is, but there are study buddies that you can connect with other students. Then there are 3 assessors that will be grading your work throughout the course. So you'll see different assessors on different modules. Our assessors for the diploma course are Edgar Yu, Jim Johnson, and myself. Apart from myself, I work full-time for Open Colleges, but Edgar and Jim contract assess to us. So they're out there in the industry working on projects and staying relevant with what's happening. So we aim to have a lot of our assessors very current so that they can provide you with some really good insight and things that you're doing. So you'll see Edgar and Jim will comment later on in the course. And then, as I mentioned, I will be your primary point of contact for any academic type questions. So if you have problems with the learning material or any of your assessments, or if you get feedback back on an assessment and you're not sure how to go about resubmitting that assessment, you can contact me, send me a message to the Open Message Centre, and I'm more than happy to help you and work through some of that with you. So yeah, reach out to me as your first point of contact for anything academic. Student support are your first point of contact for anything administrative. So don't ever feel like you're alone. So, you know, just raise your hand and say, I'm here, I need help, and I'll definitely be there to help you. Okay, what is project management? Maybe just as an interest, just before we get into that, how many of you would consider yourself to be in a project role now, whether it be a project manager role, project coordinator, or you've been around projects a lot? If you're already in that environment, if you could just raise your hand, just so I know the level of experience, I suppose, and where we're coming from. Okay, so it looks like most of you guys on tonight's webinar are actually already operating within a project scenario, which is great. So I'll quickly just touch on this, but it should make a lot of sense to you. And then for those that aren't, this is the kind of thing that you will be learning, so that's great. As you know, project management can be applied to a lot of different industries. You know, there was a day when it was primarily, engineering type infrastructure, construction type projects was the traditional project management. And even now, I still have a lot of students that come through from that construction or council type background, working on different, various infrastructure type projects. But it's now being applied to a lot of different industries. IT is a big area where project management is applied today. But even in all the areas within companies, it's becoming a lot more important. My background actually is more events, not-for-profits, and working with my most recent project experience, I guess, was I've got a company with a couple of other directors where we rolled out a business support system which provided resources and training to people across a number of different industries, and we're actually different markets, and we are licensed to a US company to do that. So I worked in the US for a while, traveled back and forth, and worked with all their international offices to make sure everything was compatible and compliant and everything was functioning, and training their support team, customer support teams and things like that. So very different than the traditional project management, and that just shows how far project management as a discipline and industry is growing. So it's a great course to study, regardless of what career. If you change career paths, it's great to carry across to your more into a different career, or if you are progressing up through a organization, it's just great skills to have. And a lot of organizations are using projects even on a short-term basis to launch and to help them to achieve some of their strategic objectives. So there might be a new opportunity that's come up as a result of, a customer request or new market demand or something like that, or there is changes either technological or in the legal or environmental areas that require a short-term project to be put into place to address all those issues, or to launch a new product and that kind of thing. So more and more organizations are looking for people with project management skills. And project management is simply applying all of the knowledge and skills and techniques that we learn in the course to a project to meet those requirements and ensure that those outcomes and deliverables meet the needs of the stakeholder. At the end, a successful project is one that will meet the need of what it was designed to do in the first place, and ideally come within budget and the schedule as close as possible, maintaining quality standards, etc., etc. And we'll look at that triple constraint thing in a second. It's a unique endeavour. It's got a defined beginning and an end. It's not daily work. And this will be obvious to most of you, so I'll just show a couple of examples. The last one, for example, the routine manufacture of an iPod is not a project. It's just an operational, daily work. But if you were to launch and design a new media player, then that would be a project. So there's a couple of examples just to show that difference. This is probably most important if you are choosing to use your own work-based project as the basis of your assignments, making sure that it does have a defined beginning and a defined end. And that is summed up in the project lifecycle. This is a table that's in the beginning of your textbook. Every project, regardless of the size or industry, will follow this path. It will always have an initiation where the initial project scope is defined and all the high-level organisation and budgets, etc., are all established. Then it moves into the planning stage, and you can see all the different areas of planning there, which, as you can see, are all the different subjects that we study, each of the different modules. We look at the project module-based, where we kind of look at each part individually, but for those of you who are working in those environments, you know that it's a holistic endeavour. So all these areas are planned. Then we moved into the work of the project where it's actually delivered. So that's the execution stage, or it might be called the delivery stage or the implementation stage. There's different terminologies depending on what industry you're in, but basically it's when the work of the project is done. And during that whole time, we've got to monitor and control. So the real, management comes in during this time where we are making sure we're meeting our quality controls and delivering and managing all of our teams and stakeholders, and any changes that are needed, which there will be, are put forward through the formal change control process, etc. So we are monitoring, controlling it during that work stage of the project where it's being implemented. And then there'll be a point where the project will come to a close. We do all our final closure, final reporting, etc. And we do our lessons learned, where we look at what worked best, what didn't work best, and what didn't work, and how can we improve for the future. So I wanted to just highlight this because when you complete your assessments throughout the course, some of the assessments you'll be completing planning type documents. So you'll need to keep in mind that you're at the beginning of the project. Others will be, during the implementation stage or that closing stage, and you'll be looking at how things could have been done better, or you'll be completing change requests or doing project reports and that kind of thing. So keep in mind where you're at the project, particularly if it is a work-based project and you are at a certain stage of it in real life. You have to just put yourself either at the end of the project or the beginning of the project and complete your documentation from that point. I've seen students who have been completing a planning document and stated what the results of the project were in that planning document. So obviously when you're planning it, you wouldn't know what those results are going to be. You know what you would want them to be, but you don't know what the actual outcomes are. So just keep in mind what stage of the project you are in as you complete your assessments. You'll find mostly the first written report, the O2 report that you complete, will be around this initiation planning stage, and often the last written report will be during the latter parts of the project. So they'll build as you go through anyway, but I just wanted to highlight that to help you. Key concepts for managing scope. First thing we have to do is gather the requirements, find out what the work of the project is going to be, define that in our scope management plan. We might have a scope statement or a scope of works. Once again, every industry is slightly different, but there'll be a document that will document what the scope includes and what it doesn't include. And then from that, we work on our work breakdown structure, which really forms the foundation of our schedule and our budget, and looking at what human resources and equipment we need and all of that resourcing aspect. So scope is really the important part. If we miss things in our scope planning and we don't find that missing element until later in the project, then that's going to blow out our schedule and our budget. So getting our scope defined really clearly at the beginning is really important, and then monitoring and controlling that throughout the project is also important, so we don't end up with scope creep and don't end up doing things and adding on extra features that we haven't got officially approved. So using our change orders or change requests, same thing, different terminology once again, but using those forms and getting changes officially approved and authorized means that you'll be keeping everything approved through it. So managing all of that, and then eventually closing the project, handing over our deliverables and documenting our lessons learned is all there. And if we don't get this right, we can't plan our schedule, or we can't work out our budget or anything like that. I often use the example for students that if I said to you, how long will it take you to build me a house and how much is it going to cost? Until you find out what kind of house I want, how big, what is included, do I want air conditioning, do I want landscaping, what's required on the property, there's no way you can tell me how much it's going to cost or how long it's going to take. So all of that requirements and figuring all that out at the beginning then sets the foundation for the rest of the project. The other thing that's important to do at the beginning of a project also is to look at the triple constraints and decide on and find out where the priorities are for the project sponsor. If you get this clear at the beginning, it makes it much easier to make decisions throughout the project. If we find we've got a change in one of these three areas, scope, schedule, and our resources, which is our human resources, but also our budget, cost, etc., a change in one of these areas will also impact the other areas. And so we're constantly having to look at our constraints in these three areas and making adjustments and making decisions that best suit the project, that also maintain the quality so that we don't compromise on the quality of the project that we are expected to deliver on. And the reason it's important is because often scope is the most important part in a lot of projects. What we're actually delivering, the features, the functionality is important, particularly if you're looking at something like the release of a new drug, for example, that might be there. It's got to pass a lot of regulations, tests and all that before it's ever going to be released into the market. So it might go through a number of tests and things like that, which may mean that it's got to be delayed from launch, or it might cost more money, take longer on it, and that just has to be done. Anything that's legislation based, if you're a car, for example, you're not going to release it if the brakes aren't meeting legislation and safety standards and things like that. So often the scope is the most important part, but from my background, when I did a lot of events, the schedule was by far the most important part, and everything was dependent on the schedule. If you were running late and got behind on the schedule, you don't have the option to delay a concert by a week just because you're running late. So you have to stick to that, and that's your fixed component of the project. So you either cut back on what you're doing, reduce your scope, or you throw more people and more money at it to get it done on time. If you're looking at a not-for-profit type of project, budget will often be the constraint, and you'll have a very strict budget that you've got to come to. Or in my case, when I was doing like charity dinners, budget and schedule were constrained, so scope was always the area that I would have to reduce and flex in order to meet the other two. So knowing your project and what is important, where you've got flexibility, is key to making the right decisions as you go through. So that's just a little bit about what project management is, and that might be all very familiar to you, I'm sure it is, but hopefully it's giving you a little bit of a different perspective on some of the other type of projects that perhaps might be out there. So when you come to choosing a project for your assessments, there's a few things that I want to just highlight. Make sure you choose a project that has a defined purpose, start and end, but also make sure that it's quite robust. Because ideally you want to stick with the same project right throughout the course. You can swap if you need to, but like you are in real life, you are building on a project from your work breakdown structure into your schedule, then looking at your budget, looking at your risks, all those sort of things that all build from that one project. And near the end of the project course, there is a module called Manage Project Integration, where you pull the project together and show how the different parts of the project are dependent on each other. And there's other documents, like when you complete the project charter and integration, a lot of that information is similar to the project authorization form that you'll complete in scope. So you can the information will all correspond, and it will be much easier to complete some of those later units if you've used the same project from the beginning. If you need to change, you can, but within a module, it's best to stay with the same project within a module, because often the last written assessment will follow on from the first written assessment, and it will build. So just keep that in mind. So you can either use a work-based project or the case study. Whichever you use, take time to fully understand that organisation and the project, because the more you can imagine yourself in that scenario, particularly if you use the case study, the easier it will be for you to apply what you're learning through it. All right, we've just got a question. What is IAJ? So IAJ is the Indo-Aus-JR, which is the company for the CRM project. So when we bring up the case study, you'll see. But it's the company initials, I guess, of the case study, which is a CRM project where we're implementing a CRM project. And so you'll see that coming up. Probably should spell that out on here. Thank you for that. Probably not as clear as it should be. Benefits of using the case study, which is, as I said, as a CRM implementation, is that all the background information is provided to you in the additional resources folder in open space. And on the assessment document, you'll be given the scenarios with briefing notes. So if there's an issue or there is a conflict that you need to address or something like that, it will give you that sort of scenario background that you can use as the basis for your application. If you use a work-based project, you would have to use a conflict scenario or an issue or something like that in your work project, or you would just have to make up something that would be appropriate, which you're more than welcome to do. So that's one of the benefits, and it may give you a chance to look at something that is new. How many, just out of interest, have been into open space already, have got familiar with it and know where the additional resources folder is? Does everyone know where that is? All right, looks like it. Is there anybody that doesn't know what I'm talking about, that doesn't know where the additional resources folder is? So if you don't know where it is, okay, so it's about half and half. So what I'll do just quickly, I'll just bring up that slide. As I said, you can log on to one of the daily webinars with the learning support team, and they can take you through a little bit more. But just quickly, when you're logging in, your page here will obviously look a little bit different. But this is the main landing page where the discussions are and things like that. And you've got your left-hand navigation where your learning materials are. So you've got Manage Project Scope. Just above that, this little circle with the icon is the additional resources. So if you click on that, and then click on that, it will then open up the folder, which will then have all of the different information in there. And it'll have all of the documents. So all of these are the documents that you will use for the main assessment. So the first one is the Indo-Aus-JR CRM project brief. So that is your main project brief case study document that we'll go through shortly. But it will then also have each of the other modules and different things that you will need. In Module 1, you will also need to refer to this memo, which is for the last assessment that we'll go through as well in a moment. But when you come to Module 3, you'll need to use this one, etc. If you're using your own work-based project, then you wouldn't need to use these at all. But if you're using the case study, all of the information you need is in here. Just want to point out this one here, the case study scenario here, this is, and you'll see when you download it, is actually the sustainability one. So we've got to get module, whatever number it is, 9 I think it is, typed in front of that. But this is the main project brief that you'll be wanting to download. So that is the additional resources folder. As I said, it's in here. Everything else you'll click in here, and this is all your online learning materials that we'll go through, and we'll come back to this in a second when we talk about that part. So that will help you a little bit there. Swap this back. All right, so that's if you're using the case study. The benefits of using your own work-based project is that you can apply what you are learning straight into your own work environment. and you'll be able to apply those skills into your industry, and you may benefit your organization by perhaps introducing some best practices that perhaps they haven't looked at before. I just actually received an email from another student a couple of weeks ago. He had done a performance review using the performance review template that's in the stakeholders and human resource modules, where you do a performance review on an employee. And he had done that assessment, and he did his assessment based on a real performance review he needed to do for one of his team anyway, and submitted that as well as his assessment. He also submitted it to his HR department as his official performance review. And his HR department actually liked it so much that they have actually adopted that template as their organizational new template, because they felt that it captured the information better than what they had been previously using. So it directly impacted his organization as well. So there's things like that that can help. As I said, just make sure it's robust and complex enough to use throughout the course. If it's a 2-week, $20,000 project with 3 team members, it's probably not going to have enough depth and diversity and issues and things like that to apply right throughout the course. So just have a look at that and look at the modules and make sure that it's going to have enough complexity. You can create, just that last point there, you can be creative and add information or create issues that would be there in order to complete the assessments, because it's the application of what you're learning that's the important part. So you can always fatten it up, but obviously you don't want to be creating everything from scratch. And either way, if you do use your own project, just make sure it does meet the assessment requirements. If your work is a scope management plan, for example, but it doesn't include everything that is required within the assessment requirements, it wouldn't be sufficient on its own. You would need to add that extra information in, etc., because there are fairly strict criteria that the training package that the government outlined that we need to show must be included. So just make sure that it does, and supplement it if you need to. So they're your options to use your work-based project or the case study. I find it's about 50-50 with work project and case studies coming through, so it's completely up to you and what is going to work best in your scenario. So that will be with the project. Okay, so let's have a look at completing the assessments. This is probably the part of the webinar you're probably most looking forward to. Some general tips before we get into the scope assessments. Make sure you've taken time to go through the learning content first, do the reading and the textbook, that kind of thing, just to get an idea of the concepts before you launch into the assessment tasks. There's some videos, lots of great resources there that will really help you to get your head around it. There are learning activities that you will see as you go through as well, which allow you to practice what you are learning. So the learning activities in the online topics are not compulsory. They're not assessed. They're not looked at by any assessors. It's just mainly if you come across a concept and you want to practice that, or you've never looked at that before, it gives you a chance to practice what you're learning, and you can also see what other students have uploaded and how other students have approached it. So it enables you to kind of glean from each other in that part. But if it's a topic that you know really well, if you're already doing project management and you are doing this stuff on a daily basis, then they're not compulsory. You can always skip those learning activities and just move on to the actual assessments. So use them in the way that helps you the most. The other thing I want to highlight is as you go through that online material, there's topic numbers assigned to each of the different parts of the assessments. But what you'll find is when the assessments documents were completed, and this is something I'm going to be fixing next year once we get into the new year, but they were written with the assumption that you are already in the module that you are in. So if you're in module 1 and the assessment says to refer to topic 2.4, it means 1.2.4 because you're already in module. So sometimes that module number will be missing from the front. You're not going to need to go to a different module in order to answer that particular question or that particular part of the assessment. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes the module number is missing from the front. So if it doesn't look right, pop that number in front, and then I think you will find it. And I'll show you a couple of examples of that as we go through the actual assessment documents soon. All right, there are 3 assessments per module, all the modules have 3 assessments. The first is a quiz. In the quizzes, you must score 80% or higher to pass. If you're not successful and you score 70% or 60% or something like that, then you'll just need to wait 24 hours and then you can have another attempt. And when you do have your next attempt, you only need to answer the questions that you either got incorrect or partially correct from your first attempt. It will automatically save the correct answers. So just go back in, look for anything that's on the navigation menu that's marked as yellow or red, and just re-answer those particular questions and then go ahead and submit. So those quizzes, you can have as many attempts as you need. All the assessments, because it's competency-based training, all the assessments you can have multiple attempts on until you show competency. So with the quiz, it's 80% or higher to pass. With the written assessments, if you get a withheld or an incomplete or a submission error, you'll need to resubmit, and the assessor will give you feedback on what needs to be adjusted. Otherwise, if it's satisfactory, it'll show as satisfactory with a grade of either pass, credit, distinction, or high distinction, depending on how well you have applied your knowledge into that particular assessment. So, yeah, quizzes 80% or higher. Sometimes, if it's a reattempt, your results page may take up to 24 hours to update. So just to keep that in line. All right, I have a question about the learning activities. Will they be pop-ups or how do I find them? When you go through that online learning material, you'll see that it's highlighted as a learning activity. And I'll show you that now because I do want to show you the recording. Actually, I'll show you after these next couple of slides. I'll go back into open space and I'll show you where the learning activities are and where the recording functions and things like that are. So I'll hold that thought and I'll be back to that in a moment. So that's a quiz. As I said, there's 2 written assessments per module. We don't accept drafts because of the fact that you have unlimited attempts. So the best thing to do is do your best, submit it, you'll get formal feedback from the assessor, and if you need to make adjustments, you can make those adjustments and then resubmit a second time. Use the assessment task document that you download to complete your answers on, and where you can, keep as much as possible on the one document, and use the templates where provided if they have them, because it means that you will definitely meet the assessment requirements. It's all on one document. It's easy for you to make sure that you have actually answered everything that you need to, and it also makes it easy for the assessor and any future auditors to see what the question was and how you've answered it. So it makes it easier all around if it's all on one document as much as possible. Where you have audio files, or if you've completed your schedule in MS Project or Smartsheet or Excel or something like that, then of course that will be a separate document, and you can upload multiple documents. But as far as the written content, the more of that can be on the assessment task document, the better all around. I also get questions about the word count. It will give you a guide as to what kind of amount of content is required, particularly when you are writing like emails or paragraph answers. That's probably when it's most relevant. When you are completing templates, use it just as a guide because it does depend on the project, particularly if you use a work-based project. So when you're completing your scope management plan document, for example, depending on your project and the complexity of the project, it can vary in how much information you need to put into that. So use it as a guide, but it's probably most applicable when you need to write emails or any of those other type non-template questions and parts of the assessment. You'll soon find out from the assessors anyway if you are going into too much detail or not enough. So once you get through a few modules, you'll soon get an idea of what's required. Just a couple of key things. Make sure your student name and number are on the first page before you submit. Make sure you've completed all parts and proofread your work. As I said, think of this, it's very practical. So think of the assessments as documents that you would complete in your workplace and present them in the same way that you would present your workplace documentation, which hopefully is grammar checked, spelling checked, formatted well, etc. So think of it as a professional business document. Some of the assessments also have an audio requirement component, and that came in with the latest update to the training package last year. And that's because communication is a really important skill for project managers. So there will be some audio recordings throughout the modules as you go through, but it doesn't have to be a real life situation. Obviously it won't be if you're using a case study, but even if you're using a work-based project, you can role play the scenario with a friend, family member or work colleague, and they're all usually between 5 or 10 minutes in length, so they're not massively in depth. Just make sure that you give your role play partner briefing notes so they have an idea of what to say. But for your part, you can actually script out what you want them to say as well if you want to make it easier on them. But for your part of the conversation, it's best if you can use bullet points where possible rather than reading word for word from a script, because it makes it more natural. So it should be just like a normal work conversation. There are a few recording options. If you're not by your computer or you're out somewhere, you can use the camera on your phone as a great way, even if you put it face down so it just records the audio. Some students use voice memo type apps. Otherwise, if you've got your computer, you can use the recording function that's in Open Space, and it will record straight in for you to be able to then upload straight away. So I'll show you that in a second, because that's when I go in there. I'll just show you where that is. It's only fairly new, but already the students that are using it are finding it really easy. So it's a great option. And then you simply just upload that file along with any other Word documents or PDFs into Open Space. And as with the written components, with the recordings, just try and stay as close as you can to the required length. The recording function in Open Space actually has a limit of 10 minutes anyway, so it will make you keep your recording concise. All right, so let me just go back into Open Space and I'll just quickly show you where that is. So when you come through, you've got the different topics. If I click on the different topics here, you've got all the written component. You can, for reading, you'll come down, there will be different, oh, that wasn't the best. That was just all written. Okay, going through into the next section. When you come on down, you will see at different times there are videos, and that's what this will likely be. It'll also give you some reading where you can read things. It'll say if there's reading in the textbook, the reading will say to read pages 105 to 108 of your textbook, so it'll also follow that. Videos to watch, and then these are the learning activities. So anything with a pink puzzle piece will have an activity, and then it will say, you know, what's the components, and you could type your answers in here. And as you can see, there's been plenty of other students, 187 discussions from students. So you can learn and, as I said, learn from each other and answer these type activities. So that'll be your learning activities. When you come into here, when you scroll down at the bottom is the assessments, the quiz 2 written assessments. And when you click on them, this is where you will download your assessment document that I will show you live next. But you'll download it here, and that will download a document that you can then save. This is the recording function, so you simply click on here and it will give you some testings, and it will then, you can start the recording. If you don't like it, it'll give you the option to redo it, or you can save it. So then you can choose to submit that. When you go to upload, you can select that file, and you can also upload any other documents and submit. So it all happens within this part here. So that's Open Space. But as I said, if you aren't familiar, log on and register for one of the learning support ones, because they go through this in a lot more detail, and it'll be really beneficial for you. Okay, so now I want to get into the scope assessments for this particular module. So that was just some general advice to help you approach your assessments overall. When you come to your actual scope assessments, as I said, they're practical, so you don't need to worry about formal academic writing. And the other important thing is to know that you are the project manager. So whether you're using the case study or your own work-based project, you need to put yourself in the project manager role and put your name down in that role on all your documentation and complete the assessments from that perspective. So not only is it important to know what stage of the project life cycle you are in when you complete that assessment, but also assume the role of the project manager and then complete the assessments from that perspective. There are 2 written assessments. The O2 one has 3 parts. Make sure you don't miss part B. It's often skipped over. And the O3 assessment has 4 parts, which includes the audio discussion. Don't miss part D. These are the 2 parts that are most commonly missed out when students submit. So just be aware that you have actually answered those particular parts. All right, so what I want to do now is bring up those particular assessments. And we'll go through scope. So the first thing you'll do is you'll download the project brief. And this is the Indo-Australia Customer Relationship Manager Project Brief document. That's in the additional resources folder that I showed you before. Get really familiar with this document, particularly for scope. If you are using the case study, when you complete the scope assessment, this will give you pretty much all of the information you need. Sometimes that gives students the false impression that they're going to be given all the information they need for every assessment. That's not the case. It's only because the first scope assessment is where you are creating a scope management plan and form, which needs to be closely aligned to what the sponsor wants, which is what's outlined here in the project brief. So most of the other assessments you will then be applying the knowledge that you need. And there are still some parts of the assessment where you need to make your own decisions and things like that in. So if you're using a work-based project, you can use this project brief as a guide if you want to the kind of information you need to be looking for in your work-based project. So you'll come through. This has got literally tons of information. So go through it all. It'll give you all the background, the corporate structure. This will be important because this is the department that you work within, and this is all the other people that work within the department. So you as the project manager will be able to select your project team, and it does tell you, we'll see later on, that you can you'll be using internal staff and that you can select who you want. So you can go through this corporate department and choose who you want for your project team based on the kind of things that you need done. So this is where you'll come to when you are selecting your team and choosing which people that you think are going to be most important. For example, Dan King, you know, you're doing a CRM system, so it'd be great to have some of these guys who are in IT would be obvious for your team. You might need to be doing some training, so earner would be great to include, etc. So just have a look at who's relevant and pick them out of there. It also gives you a background of the problem, the objectives, key success factors, and as you'll see, a lot of this information is what you need for the scope management plan and the project authorization form. You'll see objectives, key success factors, so you'll come to the relevant sections in here. What's included in scope and what's not included. Always important to include what's not going to be included, so there's no issues or disappointments come delivery time at the end. Section 5 is really important for when you are completing your work breakdown structure, because it's going to give you all of the key stages, but also then all the tasks that are required underneath each of those stages. So you've got internal analysis, system configuration, and the tasks. So I would be basing my work breakdown structure on this tasks milestone column, utilizing this main heading, and having a stage. You know, we've got analysis, design, development, etc. As your stages or your phases of your project, and then having all this as your breakdown. So this will give you a lot of that, and it will also give you each of those 8 stages well with the start and end date, so it makes it really easy to build your work breakdown structure off this, and then your schedule will also build from here. Deliverables, some of the constraints on the project. Then you've got your governance structure. So this part will explain all of the project governance, so you can go through all of that. It will also say here what the roles within the project team will be, that members of the project team will be drawn from IAJ employees, etc. So this is where it gives you that sort of instruction as to what that team's going to look like. It's going to give you the procedure for change management if a change is required in the project. So when you're looking at your scope control, You're going to want to be following these steps. We come on down, it then covers off on all the risks of the project, the budget overall, some key assumptions, and then what is needed for scope for the acceptance of the project at the end, and what the project board is going to be required to do to accept this and authorize the project. So you'll see that in here there's a lot of information that you need. So get really familiar with that and go through it all in a lot of detail. Then you'll come to your actual assessment document. So as I said, download the assessment document, save it onto your hard drive and change the file name, and then make sure you put your name and number on the first page. When you go through these documents, the first part will simply outline the overall assessments, which is the quiz and the 2 written reports. So you can kind of skip past this part. The instructions section here will give you the file name that you need for that document when you save it. Then when we come on down here, this is where it's going to then outline what is required in this particular assessment. And as I said, you can either choose to use your own work project, or you can use the case study. So either one, you can choose to use it. And there's 3 parts to this particular assessment. Part A is the project authorization, Part B is project governance, and Part C is the scope management plan. Now, the reason most people forget the project governance is because there is a template provided for the project authorization form, and you'll find that that template includes all of these sections. So that's why completing the template will make sure that you have covered off all the sections that you need. And you'll also see that in the scope management plan, once again, it lists all the sections and it says to use the template in Appendix 2. So often this gets missed because there's no template, so you just need to type this up in written form or use diagrams or something like that. So it's very easy to go to the end, complete Appendix 1, complete Appendix 2, and submit, and this part gets missed. So that's why I say keep an eye on that. There's 3 parts to the assessment, what the requirements are, and what you can use. So let's have a look at those parts. Appendix 1, which is the project authorization form. This is completed right at the very beginning, initiation stage of the project. So it's high level. So I think very high level when you complete this. Put in the project title, sponsor, manager, and the team members, the start and the end date of the project. Make sure you put the years in there as well, because there's no year in the case study. This is where you then apply it and go, okay, well, it would be logical. We're in November. I would be starting it in January 2017, for example. So put real dates in there and put in your budget. List the objectives and the deliverables and any constraints. If it's your own work-based project, you'll have all that information, or we'll be able to find that. If otherwise, you can kind of look at the case study as a bit of a guide. Obviously, if you're using the case study, all of that information is there. There's actually a line missing here, which we need to fix up, but you'll need to add an extra section in here for the 5 phases if you're using the case study, because it had the 5 major phases, and then under that it gives you what each of those deliverables, those subtasks and subphases within it into there, and what the milestones were and the dates for that. So all of that information will come out of that section 5, that roadmap and the milestones section. You'll be able to include all of that. Otherwise, for your own project, just list out what the phases are and what the deliverables and the dates are for each of those. And that's it for the project authorization form. So once again, this is high level, so I think very high level here. When you then come into your scope management plan, this is where you start to get a lot more detailed, and you are adding a lot more information on your scope management plan. Once again, basic information at the top, bit of a summary of what the project is all about. And then this roles and responsibilities section is to do with all your team members. So once you've selected your team, you can outline some of what those roles may be. Now, that won't be given to you in the project brief, so you would just need to write some responsibilities, based on what would be logical for that particular role. So if it was someone in HR or someone in training, their role might be, to assist with the training delivery and the preparation of training and the delivery of training of staff on the new system or something like that. So list out your team and what the responsibility are. Scope definition. This is once again just a brief definition on what the scope is in the project as a summary. And then you're going to list very clearly what was in scope and what was out of scope. And we saw that in that project brief document. Also, the major milestones will go in here of the project and what the success criteria is. So from the case study, all of that information was provided. What isn't provided is the key meeting dates. So as I said, you won't always be given everything. You'll need to apply what would be logical. If you were the project manager, what meetings would you run? How often are you going to meet with your project team? How often would you meet with your major stakeholders or the project portfolio board, etc.? So you can just plan out some, from a high level, what would be some of the key meeting dates and how often, that kind of thing. So put in a bit of an overview on what meetings you're going to be having on a regular basis in there. This is where you'll document your work breakdown structure, utilising that roadmap with starting off with the major phase and then breaking it down to which is 5 major phases. There's 8 then milestone stages within that, and then you've got all the different tasks. So you should at least be able to break it down at least 3 levels in your work breakdown structure. If you're using your work-based project, then that could be that could be quite diverse as to how big this is. Once again, it will depend on your project, but make sure you always have a planning stage and a closing phase, and then all the other, parts of the job project in between. Scope verification. How is the scope going to be verified in the project? So in that part, just describe what acceptance is needed, who needs to verify it or agree that that scope is accurate, who verifies that it does actually support what is, will support the project objectives, etc. And same with the sponsor acceptance. Just once again, include a description there on who's going to be validating that is there going to be any inspections, is there any testing, is there any documents that are going to need signed off, etc. And your scope control is explaining that process. If a change is needed, what is that going to what's that going to look like? So you'll see those, these ones you'll just need to explain how that's going to be verified and accepted, and also list out all of your assumptions and constraints. Section 9 of that project brief also covered off quite a little bit about what would be expected, what the project board would need to do, etc. if you were using the case study, and assumptions, dependencies and constraints. So that is your scope management plan. As I said, very, very practical, much more detailed than the project authorization form. So this is the initiation stage, this is your planning stage, and in between, this is part A and this is part C. And if we go back up to the instructions, you've also got part B, which is where you need to list the parties that will form the governance structure. So that is, there's a whole section on that in the case study as we saw, but if you're using your own work-based project, think about it. What is the broader authority structure in the project beyond the project manager? If you're the project manager, who do you report to? Who signs off on things? Are there other departments that have impact into that? Is there a steering committee or a project board, etc.? So that's where you would outline it, and you feel free to add a organizational structure if it helps to show that a little bit more clearly. So you can just include that. Most students complete this, and then in here they'll just insert spaces and they'll just complete part B in here, and then they'll have part C is there. So just make sure you complete all 3 parts for that particular assessment. All right, we're almost at the end of the webinar. Assessment 3, the last written assessment. On this one, you will need to have a look at the memorandum, which is in the additional resources folder if you are using the case study. If not, you will need to identify a scope change that happened in your work-based project. So it might be adding extra features or extra functionalities or increasing the number of a particular deliverable or something that you're doing. So think about a scope change, and you'll base this assessment on that one. If you're using case study, you will base it on this change here. And this is from Tom Widojo, who is the CEO, so he's the project sponsor, to you as the project manager. He sent it to you saying, a recent review of financial processes has indicated it would be beneficial to include the accounts team as users of the CRM, and why. So you'll use that to then complete your change document, change order form. So this is the 03 assessment task 303. Once again, download it, save it with the new file extension, add your name and number on the front. Come on down to where it breaks down this particular assessment, assessment 3. It will show there are 4 parts to the assessment. Part A is a consultation with a relevant stakeholder to discuss the project and the scope amendment. Part B is the actual change order form. Part C is an issues register, and then Part D will be identifying 2 improvements that you could make. So this is kind of like your lessons learned in a less formal format. So this is all happening, this is all stuff that is happening during the implementation stage and closing stage of the project. You don't have to do it in this order either. Oftentimes, like if it was me, I'd be completing the change order form first and then having the telephone conversation. So whatever works for you, as long as all 4 parts are completed before you submit, then that's fine. Part A is the audio consultation. So it's going to tell you what you need to discuss in the conversation, and it's also going to give you the briefing notes for your role play partner. So if you're using the case study, what you'll do is you'll come down to the appendixes and you'll see briefing notes. So if you're using the case study, your role play partner will be the finance manager, Lynn Sunji. And it's going to say what they would like to see included in the CRM, and some of their major concerns and the issues are listed here as well. So this will give you plenty of stuff for your role play partner to discuss with you. If you use a work-based project, as I said, just whatever that change scenario is, you can discuss that scope change. And whoever records with you, just get them to sign this consent form and make sure that that's uploaded as well. So that'll be the audio. It will tell you how long, so 5 minutes is all it needs to be, so you don't need to go into massive amounts of detail. And the most important thing is that it's demonstrating that you can communicate, so that you can ask questions, listen, discuss things, negotiate, all that kind of thing. So that's the key element there. Part B is the actual scope change. So we're going to complete a change order form, which is in Appendix 3. And that's where it says, if you're using the case study, refer to that memo. If not, refer to another scope change. So when we come down to that template, fairly straightforward to complete. Put in the name, start, end date of the project, give it a project number and a change request number. Put your name in there as the project manager. Give a bit of explanation of what the change is. In this case, adding the accounts department or whatever your scope change is, and a little bit of background information to that. Then you're going to indicate what impact is this change going to have. Is it going to have a positive effect or a negative effect on each of these areas? So is it going to be a positive impact on the service and the quality, or negative? Is it going to increase the schedule? So is it going to have a negative impact because it's going to make it longer, or it's going to increase budget? Or is it going to fall within schedule and within budget and therefore have a positive effect? So indicate positive or negative, and what level of impact, whether it's just going to be a low impact or a really high impact, and a bit of a description on what that impact is, how it's going to impact it, and why you've sort of indicated these points here. Communication, this is who you need to communicate about this particular scope change. So if you're using a case study and you are including the accounts department, and you obviously need to have a discussion with the finance manager. So she would be someone that would obviously be someone you would need to communicate with. You might need to communicate with other people on your project team, etc. And this is who you are directly communicating with to assist you with this change. Notification of change requirements is who you need to notify about the change. So this might be like the portfolio board or those higher levels that wouldn't be directly involved in the discussions, but they need to be notified and kept in the loop on it. So that's the difference between these two here. And then once again, just completing it, you can put in dates in here and make up dates that are suitable. You're requesting it as the project manager, so make sure you put your name in there as well. So that's just a change order form, and then you would discuss that as well with Lynn Sunji. Part C is the issues register. So after you've had that consultation and those issues that have come up, list those in your issues register. Otherwise, if it's your own project, list some of the issues that have come up that you need to deal with. And then you're going to identify 2 improvements to the scope management process. So I'll show you quickly. The issues register is pretty straightforward. What the issue was, when it was raised, is it still open or closed? And if it is closed, when was it closed? Who is responsible for resolution? Make that quite specific. Don't just say project team, because if you don't make it specific, no one will take responsibility for it. So who is specifically going to be responsible for addressing that issue, and by when, and then any other information that you might have. If you're using a work-based project, make sure that you have at least, say, 3 issues. Don't just put in 1 issue. Give it a bit of depth by adding a few issues, even if you need to make up something that suits. Yeah, 1 wouldn't be suffice. So yeah, just make sure it's got enough information in there to show that you understand that concept really well. And then the last part is, as I said, the improvements. So this is where you're going to write. You identify 2 improvements. There's 400 words, so I would write 200 words on each one. And look at how you would better manage the scope in the future. So look at what issues came up and how things took place, what that process looked like, and give some improvements. So you can also think about, going back to what we looked at with scope at the beginning, how were requirements gathered? How was it defined? Was it defined well enough? Were changes managed well, or could there be improvements to that change management process, etc.? So think about the whole process of managing scope, what the issues were that came up, or why that change came up and why a change was needed, and how could we have avoided that change coming up in the first place, or how could we have avoided some of those issues. So just write a couple of paragraphs in here to answer that particular improvement. And then once you've completed all of that section, then you simply upload it and resubmit for grading. So that covers off the 2 written assessments and the case study. As I said, if it's you can use any of this as a guide for your work-based project if it helps. And as I said, it's completely up to you as to which one you decide to go with. So that brings me to the end of everything that I wanted to cover on the particular webinar. But I do want to open it up now. If there are any specific questions that you have, feel free to ask. If there's anything that I didn't cover or that you just want clarified a little bit further, feel free to type in some questions now. Otherwise, if you have left the webinar, which you're more than welcome to wrap up now if you need to go and you've got other things on tonight, but feel free to message me at any time during open space. You can ask any questions through there. Also, any feedback. If you've got any feedback on tonight's webinar, feel free to send me anything through open space. I'll be available to answer any other questions. You might want to wait until you're getting into the assessments and then get to it and go, oh, I really should have asked that question. So feel free to use the message center to keep in touch and to ask anything, particularly in these early modules as you're just getting the hang of what you need to do and how you need to go about it. But there hasn't been any extra questions come through at this stage. So we will, oh, there is one question. Is this webinar available with your audio for future reference? I have actually recorded it, so I can make that available to you. So I'll send that out probably sometime tomorrow. Once I download it, I'll upload it onto a website, a YouTube site, and I'll email that YouTube link out to everyone that attended, just so you've got a copy of it if you want to go through it as well, and also email out the PowerPoint slides. Another question, checking, I should use a project that would be large enough to use throughout the whole course. Yes, I would definitely look at making it robust enough. If you don't, as I said, you can make up situations and add in extra information. However, that can become quite exhausting and time consuming to have to constantly be making up things. So I think if you can use a project that's large enough, you will find it much easier. Otherwise, I would go with a case study. But once again, you can always start off with the first one, and if it looks like it's not going to be enough, I actually assess the first assessment, so I can always come back to you and say, I think you might find this is not going to be complex enough. It doesn't have to be massively complex. It just needs to have risks and quality management and procurement and human resources and, you know, that kind of, enough of those sort of areas that you can use. So, yep, that would be great. All right, well, I appreciate you all taking the time out on your Monday night to join me. I really hope it has been beneficial and it's given you a little bit more confidence in how to get started with everything. I know you'll have more questions, so stay in touch. Reach out to me anytime you need any help or encouragement, and I will be here to assist you. So thank you again for attending, and I look forward to all of your future assessments coming through and to doing this journey with you. Thanks again. Good night, everyone.